Hello everyone. Imagine drifting out to the edges of known space and finding something you were never meant to see. A massive warship, ancient and untouched, just floating there like a forgotten ghost. No signs of life, no distress calls, no obvious damage. Just silence, and a lot of unanswered questions. Of course, if you're human, there's only one thing to do. Claim it before someone, or something else does. But nothing in deep space is ever that simple. As our team of explorers moves in, an alien empire decides they'd rather destroy the ship, and everyone on board, than let humanity have it. And just when things are at their worst, humanity pulls out a secret weapon so strange, so ridiculously human, you almost have to laugh. Right before everything explodes into chaos. This is a story about guts, stubbornness, and the very human talent for turning absolute madness into victory. Make sure to stick around until the end, because their journey will remind us all. Humanity always finds a way, even when the whole universe seems to stand against us. Before we dive any deeper, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Your support means the world to us. Thank you so much. Now let's jump into the adventure. Out beyond the outer rim, past the scattered debris fields and dead stars, lay a sector no one liked to talk about. A no-go zone. Not because of anything official. There were no treaties, no military patrols. Just bad stories. Whispers of ships that entered and never came back. But that didn't stop humans. Curiosity was either our greatest gift or our dumbest flaw, depending on who you asked. And so, the Arclight scout ship, a rickety, overworked vessel barely held together with duct tape and bad decisions, made its way into the forgotten black, hunting for anything valuable. And they found it. Titan's Wrath. A warship the size of a small city, drifting quietly against the backdrop of the void. Its hull was scorched in places but mostly intact. Its engines were dead. No life signs, no defense systems active, no distress signals. Just floating. Waiting. When the images first came through the scout's transmitters, there was a collective silence back at command. You could feel it through the airwaves even across light years. It was like staring at a ghost, something too massive, too impossibly old to still be out there. Major Ethan Black leaned back in his chair, a steaming cup of synthetic coffee in one hand, and studied the images on the holo display. His dark eyes, usually half-lidded with boredom, sharpened with something that might have been interest. Or maybe just annoyance that he was about to be assigned something ridiculous again. A voice buzzed over his comms. Major Black, this is Central Command. We need you to take a team and secure the vessel immediately. Ethan sighed, set down his coffee and clicked the comm on. Let me guess, he said deadpan. Because sending a handful of underpaid humans onto a giant unknown ghost ship has never gone wrong before. There was a pause on the other end, then a dry reply. We appreciate your enthusiasm, Major. He muttered under his breath. Yeah, you're gonna appreciate it even more when this thing turns out to be crawling with alien space zombies. Still, orders were orders. Within an hour, Ethan and a small team of specialists were aboard the Valkyrie dropship, speeding toward the looming shape of Titan's Wrath. Up close, the ship was even more imposing. Massive hull plates bigger than city blocks. Gun turrets that, even in their dormant state, looked capable of shredding an entire fleet. And yet, silence. No movement. No power signatures. Just the endless, eerie hum of space. Ethan stared at it through the viewport, arms crossed. Looks abandoned, said Lieutenant Ramos, sitting beside him. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Thank you, Lieutenant. I would have never guessed. The Valkyrie latched onto one of Titan's Wrath's airlocks with a satisfying clang. The boarding clamps hissed into place, and the hatch opened with a groan of protest, as if the ship itself wasn't too thrilled to have visitors. Inside, the corridors were dark but mostly intact. Metal walls stretched endlessly in both directions, scuffed and scratched by time. It didn't feel like stepping into a derelict. It felt like stepping into a tomb. The team spread out, their boots clanking against the deck plating. Lights from their suits cast long shadows across the ancient walls. Every step, every breath seemed too loud. No bodies. No battle damage. It was like the crew had just disappeared. Ethan tapped his comms. Central, this is Black. No resistance so far. No traps. No. Anything really. A faint chuckle from one of the techs, Grant, crackled over the line. Maybe they just went out for groceries and forgot to lock up. Yeah, Ethan said, scanning a doorway that looked like it hadn't been opened in centuries. Or maybe they turned into space dust and were breathing them right now. Real comforting, Grant. They kept moving. Bridge, hangar bays, living quarters, all the same. Empty. Silent. Preserved like some terrible museum of a forgotten war. It was when they reached the central command deck that the sensors started screaming. A blaring alarm lit up Ethan's wrist display. Incoming movement. Big movement. Dozens of signatures closing fast. Ethan didn't even blink. He just stared out through the cracked viewing port at the endless sea of stars and the growing shadows beyond. "Well," he said in a voice so dry it could have ignited dust. "Looks like the neighbors heard we're home." The Velgrith Dominion had arrived. And Titan's Wrath had just become a battleground. The first thing they noticed was the sound. Not the roar of engines or the thrum of weapons charging, but something deeper. A low, bone-rattling hum that seemed to vibrate through the very metal under their boots. Ethan stood on the command deck of Titan's Wrath, arms folded, staring out through the fractured viewing port. Beyond the broken glass, the shadows were shifting. "Contacts incoming," Ramos called out, checking his scanner. "Lots of them. Big." Ethan didn't move. He just watched as shapes emerged from the darkness. Dozens, maybe hundreds, moving with an unnatural grace. As they got closer, the light from the Valkyrie's flood lamps caught their forms, and the team got their first good look. They weren't ships. They weren't soldiers. They were monsters. Twisted things that looked almost alive, towering beasts with gleaming silver-like skin, their bodies rippling as if made from liquid metal. Eyes that glowed a sickly green, and limbs that flexed and twisted in ways that defied biology. One of the techs, Grant, muttered under his breath, "What the hell are those?" Ethan squinted, his voice dry. "Pets. Ugly ones." Before anyone could laugh, not that anyone was really in the mood, their comms crackled to life. A transmission. Encrypted, heavily modulated, but still recognizable. The voice was harsh and mechanical, like metal grinding against metal. "This vessel is forbidden. It belongs to no one. Depart immediately or be eradicated." Ramos shot Ethan a look. "You think they're serious?" Ethan shrugged. "Well, they're definitely not sending a fruit basket." The monsters began to move faster, surging toward Titan's Wrath with terrifying speed. The team's scanners lit up with warnings: bioengineered life forms, heavily armored, capable of tearing through reinforced hulls like paper. "This is Velgrith Tech," Grant said, his voice tight. "The Dominion's bioweapons division. We've heard rumors, but nothing like this." No one needed to be told what that meant. The Velgrith Dominion didn't want Titan's Wrath. They wanted it destroyed. And they were perfectly happy to tear apart every human on board to make sure that happened. The deck shuddered violently as the first wave hit. The outer hull groaned, steel twisting under the assault. Sparks rained from the ceilings as emergency bulkheads slammed into place. Multiple breach points. Ramos shouted. "They're trying to rip the ship open." Ethan clicked on his comms, rallying the team. "Everyone to defensive positions. Set up overlapping fields of fire. If it moves and it's not ugly enough to scare a mirror, shoot it." The team scrambled into place, weapons ready, adrenaline spiking. But deep down they all knew the truth. Their guns weren't going to be enough. Not against monsters like these. Ethan dropped behind a broken console, rifle in hand, and watched as the first of the creatures forced its way through a twisted airlock. It was bigger up close, maybe 3 meters tall, its skin rippling like mercury, claws sharp enough to carve through armor plating. It opened its mouth, a hideous vertical slit lined with rows of needle-like teeth, and roared. The sound wasn't loud so much as it was wrong, a vibration that made your bones ache and your gut churn. Ethan glanced at Ramos, who looked like he was about to be sick. "Cheer up," Ethan said deadpan. "Maybe it's just here to welcome us with a traditional Velgrith hug. You know, the kind where they rip your spine out." Ramos gave a shaky laugh, then ducked as plasma fire erupted around them. The humans fought back with everything they had. Pulse rifles, grenades, close-quarters blades, but the monsters were nearly impervious. Shots that would have torn through tanks barely slowed them down. One creature took 3 direct hits to the chest before finally collapsing, leaking a strange shimmering fluid onto the floor. But for every monster they brought down, 3 more seemed to push forward. An endless tide of metal and rage. In the middle of it all, Ethan kept moving, kept firing, kept barking orders. Not because he thought they were winning, but because stopping wasn't an option. Still, even he had to admit, if something didn't change soon, Titan's Wrath was going to become their tomb. He ducked behind a collapsed support beam, reloading his rifle with practiced ease, and tapped into his comms. "Central Command, this is Major Black," he said, voice steady despite the chaos. "We have a minor pest problem over here. Requesting authorization to deploy Plan Echo." There was a pause, then a response, terse, crackling through the interference. "Plan Echo is experimental, Major. Improving. Are you sure?" Ethan peeked around the corner as another creature barreled past, smashing a console to pieces. "Oh great," he muttered to himself. "They're bringing their ugly pets to the party and we're the hors d'oeuvres." He keyed the mic again. "Yeah, I'm sure," he said. "Because if we don't, we're gonna find out how many pieces you can break a human into before the insurance stops paying." Central Command hesitated a beat, then gave the word. "Authorization granted. Deploy at your discretion." Ethan smiled grimly. "Copy that. Time to bring out the noise." And with that, humanity's strangest secret weapon was about to make its debut. The command deck of Titan's Wrath was a mess. Smoke drifted lazily from shattered consoles. The walls were scorched with plasma burns. Somewhere down the corridor, the echoes of monstrous roars vibrated through the ship's bones. Ethan leaned over the main table, where a hastily assembled tactical display flickered with red alerts. The team circled around him. Ramos, Grant, a few battered Marines still breathing heavily from the last skirmish. "This is not sustainable," Ramos said, wiping a streak of blood, hopefully not his, off his forehead. "They're wearing us down piece by piece." "Really?" Ethan said without looking up. "I thought getting mauled by alien bioweapons was a promising career move." Grant grimaced and leaned in. "We're good, but those things are built to kill. Faster, stronger, and way uglier than anything we've ever fought." "Which brings us," Ethan said, tapping a blinking icon on the console, "to Plan Echo." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Plan Echo. The wild card. The gamble. The kind of desperate move that only made sense when everything else had already gone to hell. Ethan brought up a schematic, a small, compact device mounted onto the Valkyrie dropship, linked to amplifiers now distributed around the command deck. "Echo Pulse," he said simply. "A sonic weapon. Emits a frequency designed to disrupt the structural integrity of Velgrith bioorganisms. The science nerds back home call it resonant molecular destabilization." Grant squinted at the display. "In English?" Ethan gave a faint smirk. "It makes the big ugly monsters pop like overripe tomatoes." There was a beat of uncomfortable laughter. But it didn't erase the tension in the room. "There's a catch, of course," Ramos said, arms crossed. "This thing's never been tested in a real combat environment. Lab rats don't exactly fight back. And if the calibration's off," one of the engineers added, "it could destabilize more than just the monsters. Could take out the hull. And us." The team looked at Ethan, waiting for him to flinch, to second-guess, to hesitate. He didn't. Instead, he leaned casually against the console, hands tucked into his battered tactical vest. "So," he said, voice bone-dry, "let me get this straight. Our options are, 1. Get shredded by angry alien warbeasts. 2. Scream at them until they explode. Or 3. Politely ask them to stop and die horribly anyway." He let the sarcasm hang in the air for a moment, then straightened. "Personally," Ethan said, "I'm feeling pretty good about door number 2. Ramos shook his head. "This is crazy. You're just now figuring that out?" Ethan said. "We're on a haunted death ship in the middle of nowhere, getting stomped by intergalactic murder puppies. Crazy's been on the menu since breakfast." The team exchanged looks, worried, skeptical, but no one had a better idea. And deep down they all knew it. Conventional weapons weren't cutting it. They needed something different. Something only humans would be stubborn or insane enough to even try. Ethan pointed at the amplifiers scattered around the deck. "Get those systems online. Double-check the frequency settings. And somebody make sure we don't accidentally blast ourselves into molecular goo." Grant hesitated. "You're really sure this'll work?" Ethan picked up his rifle, slinging it over his shoulder. "Nope," he said cheerfully. "But I'd rather go out making noise than go out quiet." The team moved quickly now, racing against the clock. Techs spliced power cables into the ship's dying systems. Marines set up fallback positions just in case. Every step, every connection brought them closer to either salvation or disaster. As they worked, the deck beneath them trembled again, the monsters hammering at the outer hull, relentless, furious. Ethan glanced toward the sealed blast doors. The metal was dented inward, claw marks deep enough to make the steel weep. He adjusted his earpiece and muttered to himself, "All right, boys. Let's show them how humans say hello." Minutes later, the final connections were made. The echo pulse emitters charged up, humming with barely contained energy. A low vibration filled the air, not unpleasant but deep enough to set teeth on edge. Ethan took his place near the command console, finger hovering over the activation switch. Ramos gave him a final look. "This is insane." Ethan smiled, the kind of crooked, tired grin that said he'd long since made peace with insanity. Yeah, he said. But sometimes insane is the only way to win. And with that, he slammed his hand down on the control. The echo pulse screamed to life. The echo pulse screamed into existence. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. Even the monsters clawing at the outer hull paused, as if confused by the sudden bone-shaking noise vibrating through the ship. And what a noise it was. It wasn't a clean, heroic battle cry. It was a chaotic mess of overlapping frequencies, like 1,000 babies crying, a stack of metal pans crashing to the floor, and a chorus of humans howling completely off-key at a karaoke bar. Ethan flinched slightly as the sound hit him, grimacing. Well, he muttered, at least if we die in style. The nearest monster, a towering beast with a segmented, shining torso, let out a guttural roar, then suddenly shuddered. A hairline fracture appeared along its chest. The creature stumbled, its limbs twitching erratically. Then, with a grotesque wet pop, it burst apart, chunks of silver flesh splattering across the deck. The team stared for half a heartbeat. No one moved. Then another monster burst. And another. And another. It was like watching a grotesque fireworks show, shimmering explosions of bioengineered tissue under the weird, unbearable soundtrack of the echo pulse. Grant, crouched behind a fallen support beam, peeked out and whispered, "Holy crap. It's actually working." Ethan, reloading his rifle more out of habit than necessity, smirked. "I told you," he said. "Never underestimate the power of really bad music." But victory didn't come easy. The monsters that weren't immediately destroyed thrashed wildly, some adapting, some resisting. They moved erratically, unpredictable, smashing into bulkheads, tearing up the deck as they struggled against the sound pounding into their very molecules. The command deck shook with the force of it. Panels ripped free from the ceiling. Sparks sprayed like angry fireflies. Some of the humans were knocked flat by shockwaves from the creature's death spasms. One Marine tried to stand and got bowled over by a thrashing monster tail. "This is fine," Ethan said, voice dry as the desert. "Everything's fine. Totally under control." In truth, it was barely controlled chaos. The echo pulse worked, but it worked like setting fire to a building to get rid of a spider. Effective? Sure. Pretty? Not a chance. Recalibrating frequencies, Grant yelled over the noise, frantically typing at his wrist console. Trying to focus the blast pattern. "If we keep hitting ourselves with this, we'll all be soup by dinner." "Noted," Ethan shouted back. "Soup's off the menu." Another monster, a hulking beast with too many legs and not enough eyes, lunged across the ruined command deck. Ethan ducked under a swipe, rolled, and jammed a high-explosive charge into the thing's exposed underbelly. He kicked off and dove for cover just as it exploded in a rain of steaming gore. He hit the ground, rolled onto his back, and let out a short, breathless laugh. "Who needs therapy?" he gasped, "when you have days like this?" Around him, the tide was finally turning. The monsters were falling faster now. Some tried to retreat, dragging their broken bodies back toward the outer hull. Most simply collapsed, their forms liquefying under the constant sonic assault. One by one, the remaining creatures either burst, bled out, or scrambled into hiding. And through it all, the echo pulse howled, a glorious, hideous soundtrack to humanity's stubborn refusal to die quietly. The team regrouped near the center of the deck, weapons raised, watching the last of the creatures twitch and fall still. Ethan rose to his feet, brushing gore off his jacket, and surveyed the battlefield. What was left of it, anyway? Smashed equipment. Pools of alien fluid. Chunks of ceiling dangling from severed cables. The whole place looked like a war zone from a nightmare. "Nice and tidy," Ethan said dryly. "Central Command's gonna love the remodeling." Ramos stumbled over, holding his side where something had clearly taken a swipe at him. "That was the worst sound I've ever heard," he said, wincing. Ethan clapped him on the shoulder. "Yeah," he agreed. "But look on the bright side, now we know aliens hate bad karaoke even more than humans do." Grant limped over, checking his handheld scanner. "No more contacts on this level. Looks like we bought ourselves a little breathing room." "For now," Ethan said, scanning the darkened corridors leading deeper into Titan's wrath. "There's more ship left. And if the Velgrith sent these things, you can bet they've got nastier surprises waiting." He adjusted the settings on his rifle, the echo pulse humming low in the background, ready for the next wave. There was no going back now. They had woken the beast. And humanity wasn't going down without one hell of a fight. The corridors of Titan's wrath echoed with the low, pulsing hum of the echo pulse. The monsters were on the run now. Whatever courage or programming had once driven them was shattering under the relentless sonic onslaught. And humanity? Humanity was doing what it did best, getting creative in the most reckless way possible. Ethan stood over the tactical map, one boot casually resting on a fallen bulkhead, studying the ship's schematics with a half-smirk. "All right," he said, voice carrying through the comms. "New plan, we don't wait for them to come to us. We herd them. Like cattle. Ugly, terrifying cattle." Grant looked up from rewiring an amplifier. "Herd them where exactly?" Ethan tapped a blinking section of the map. "The central cargo hold. Wide open space. Good acoustics. Big enough for, let's call it a group performance." Ramos frowned. "You're saying we lure them into a giant sonic death trap?" Ethan grinned. "Exactly. And here," he added with dry theatricality, "we witness the ancient art of killing aliens with bad karaoke." A few tired chuckles echoed through the team. Tension cracked just a little, and that was enough. Morale mattered. Especially when your battle plan involved weaponized noise pollution. The setup wasn't pretty. They had to rig emergency power cells, drag broken amplifiers through half-collapsed hallways, and manually recalibrate the echo pulse units to focus into a single devastating blast. All while monsters still lurked in the shadows, regrouping. But humans are nothing if not stubborn. Within an hour, the trap was set. The amplifiers hummed at low power, vibrating faintly underfoot. Tripwires and sensor triggers lined the corridors leading to the cargo hold, ready to bait the enemy straight into the kill zone. "Everyone in position?" Ethan asked over comms. One by one, the acknowledgements crackled back. Marines crouched behind barricades. Engineers hiding behind shattered supply crates, fingers hovering over trigger switches. Ethan stood at the center of it all, one hand resting lightly on the master control pad. The bait? A decoy generator broadcasting a signal that mimicked the human life signs the monsters were programmed to hunt. As the first of the creatures came into view, lumbering, snarling, drawn by the false scent of prey, Ethan took a slow, steady breath. "Showtime," he said. The tripwires snapped. The decoy flared to full intensity. And every amplifier on the deck screamed at once. The effect was immediate. The monsters staggered mid-charge, their bodies spasming under the sheer force of the sound. Some tried to retreat, but the narrow corridors funneled them forward, forcing them into the trap. One by one they stumbled into the cargo bay roaring and thrashing, right where Ethan wanted them. From his vantage point, Ethan watched the chaos unfold with the detached amusement of a man who had long since given up pretending anything made sense anymore. "Congratulations, team," he said over comms, voice dry. "You've just invented galactic cow tipping." Ramos snorted somewhere across the bay. "Next time let's patent it." The echo pulse crescendoed, building to a roaring, screeching wall of sound that rattled teeth and made the very air shimmer. The monsters couldn't handle it. They burst apart like rotten fruit under a hammer, shimmering metal flesh scattering across the cargo bay in gruesome sprays. The humans didn't stop. They pushed forward, driving the remaining creatures deeper into the sonic kill zone. Every corner they turned, another amplifier awaited. Every step the monsters took, the sound grew louder, heavier, more unbearable. The Velgrith bioweapons weren't just losing. They were panicking. Some turned and tried to flee back toward the ship's hangar bays, but human teams were already cutting off escape routes, bottlenecking them into tighter and tighter spaces. Ethan stalked through the battlefield like a man taking a leisurely stroll through a chaotic symphony. He raised his rifle more out of habit than necessity. Most of the killing was being done by the music now. "Tell me again," he said, aiming at a stumbling creature and firing. "How humanity isn't the most terrifying species in the galaxy?" One of the Marines, grinning like a lunatic, replied over comms. "I mean, we did invent bagpipes." The counterattack became a rout. The Velgrith forces crumbled. Monster after monster fell, twitching, shattered under the combined force of human ingenuity and pure, weaponized stubbornness. And when the last of them collapsed, when the final echo of the pulse faded into the ship's vast, broken halls, a heavy silence fell over Titan's wrath. Ethan holstered his weapon and looked around at the wreckage. At the mangled remains of monsters, the shattered walls, the twisted amplifiers still hissing faintly with residual energy. "Not bad," he said to himself, surveying the battlefield. "Not bad for a bunch of stubborn, noise-loving monkeys." He tapped his comms. "Central Command, this is Major Black. Cargo bay secure. Minimal casualties. Maximum mess." There was a long pause. Then, through the static, the faintest chuckle from command. "Copy that, Major. Proceed to secure the bridge." Ethan adjusted his armor, cracked his neck, and started walking toward the next objective. There was still work to do. And something told him the worst wasn't over yet. The ship groaned beneath their boots as they moved. Ethan led the charge down the dark, battered corridors of Titan's Wrath, his rifle raised, his boots pounding against scorched deck plates. Behind him, the team followed, tired, bruised, low on ammo, but burning with the kind of reckless energy that came when you realized you might actually survive. Maybe. The few remaining Velgrith monsters made their stand here. Cornered, desperate, snarling in the half-light. They had retreated toward the bridge, toward the heart of the ship, and they were fighting like rabid animals, knowing there was nowhere left to run. Ethan didn't blame them. But he didn't feel bad for them either. "All right," he said over comms as they advanced, voice calm and almost bored. "Standard procedure, shoot anything that looks like it might still twitch. And if it hisses at you, shoot it twice." Grant chuckled grimly. "You think they know they're about to lose?" Ethan gave a small shrug, unseen under his battered armor. "Doesn't matter. We know." They pushed forward, using the ruined corridors as cover. Monsters lunged from side passages, some leaking strange silver ichor, their bodies warped and cracked from previous echo pulse blasts. But the humans were ready. Short, brutal firefights broke out, flashes of plasma, the crack of kinetic rounds, the wet thump of falling bodies. The team moved like a machine now, each member covering the others without hesitation, without fear. Ethan kicked down a half-melted blast door and stepped into the final approach corridor to the bridge. What waited for them was a mess of shredded bulkheads, sparking consoles, and at least a dozen of the biggest Velgrith beasts they'd seen yet, monsters that looked like they'd been cooked in a nightmare and sharpened into weapons. And they were ready for a last stand. Ethan whistled low under his breath. "Well," he said dryly, "they saved the big ugly ones for the finale. How thoughtful." He toggled his mic. "Grant, Ramos, full power to echo pulse. No more half measures." There was a brief hesitation, just long enough for a plasma bolt to whiz past Ethan's head, then a curt acknowledgement. "Roger that," Grant said, already typing furiously into his wrist console. "Charging up, now." The emitters scattered through the corridor powered up, humming with dangerous energy. This time the settings were different. This wasn't a suppression blast. This was a full-scale sonic hammer blow, calibrated to hit harder, faster, to end the fight in one devastating wave. The monsters sensed it too. They roared, a discordant, ear-splitting sound, and charged as one. "Here they come," Ramos shouted. Ethan braced himself, rifle steady, eyes narrowing. Let him come. The first monsters hit their lines like a battering ram. Massive claws tore into the floor. Snarling jaws snapped at anything that moved. The team fought hard, pulse rounds lighting up the corridor in bursts of blue and white. Grenades exploded, sending shockwaves down the narrow hallway. Sparks and blood rained in all directions. But the monsters kept coming. And then, the echo pulse fired. The sound wasn't a scream this time. It was a deep, bone-shaking roar, a sonic earthquake that tore through the corridor like a living thing. The walls rattled. The floor buckled. The very air seemed to ripple with invisible fists. The monsters convulsed mid-charge, their bodies vibrating uncontrollably. Cracks appeared across their armored skins, growing wider, deeper, until, with sickening, almost slow-motion finality, they shattered. The front wave of beasts exploded into shimmering clouds of biomatter. Those behind them tripped and stumbled, only to be ripped apart by the next surge of the echo pulse. Within seconds, the last stand of the Velgrith Dominion crumbled into nothing but steaming, broken remains. And then, silence. Heavy. Complete. Ethan lowered his rifle slowly, scanning the devastation. No more movement. No more threats. Just the battered skeleton of Titan's Wrath, and the handful of humans stubborn enough to claim it. He keyed his comms. "All teams report." One by one voices checked in. Banged up. Bloodied. Exhausted. But alive. Ethan allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. They had done it. Against all logic, against all odds, they had won. The heavy blast doors leading to the bridge were still sealed, but at this point, it was a formality. Grant moved forward, set charges, and blew them open with a muted boom. Smoke curled out of the opening. Ethan led the way through, stepping into the bridge at the heart of Titan's Wrath. It was a cavernous chamber, rows of dead consoles, a massive cracked viewport showing the starry void beyond. Everything was silent. Empty. Waiting. Ethan walked to the central command chair, a hulking throne of battered metal and worn leather, and planted himself down with a heavy sigh. He looked around at the bridge, the battered team gathering behind him, the ruined beauty of the ancient ship. And then, in a voice so dry it could have started a fire, he said, "Well, now it's officially ours. Somebody write that down." The others chuckled, the tension breaking at last. Titan's wrath, once lost to time and fear, now belonged to humanity. And out there, in the dark corners of the galaxy, the Velgrith Dominion would soon learn a new truth. Never bet against a bunch of stubborn, reckless humans, especially when they're out of patience, and out of mercy. Titan's wrath hummed beneath their feet. It was a different hum now. Not the broken, dying moan of a ship lost in time. No. This was the low, steady growl of a beast waking up after a long, very bad nap, and realizing it was still very, very angry. Ethan Black leaned back in the command chair, boots kicked up on a battered console, watching technicians scramble across the bridge like caffeinated ants. Cables sparked. Screens flickered. Panels beeped at odd intervals, most of them showing warnings that Ethan had long since decided to ignore unless they actually caught fire. He sipped what passed for coffee on this ship, a liquid that might once have been coffee before some cruel twist of fate, and sighed. "So," Grant said, leaning against a half-repaired wall, "we actually gonna fly this thing?" Ethan shrugged. "Well, it either flies, or it explodes in a spectacular display that future historians will call bold human experimentation. 50-50. Across the bridge, Ramos was trying to coax life back into the navigation systems. From the amount of swearing involved, it was going great. "You know," Ramos said without looking up, "I'm starting to think this ship hates us." Ethan chuckled dryly. "Probably. But that's fine. We're used to being hated. Adds character." The ship rumbled again, a shudder running through the deck like an old lion stretching its limbs. Engines that hadn't roared in centuries coughed and wheezed into life. Outside the massive viewing window, stars spun lazily across the darkness, waiting for the next reckless, glorious human mistake. Central Command had offered to send a recovery team, of course. Evacuate the survivors. Decommission the ship properly. Ethan had politely declined. By which he meant he ignored the call, threw the comm unit against a bulkhead, and declared Titan's wrath officially under new management. Because here's the thing about humans. We never know when to quit. We see an ancient warship abandoned at the edge of space, crawling with monsters falling apart at the seams, and our first instinct isn't to run. It's to grab the controls, kick the engines, and say, "How hard could it be?" Ethan stretched lazily, feeling the chair creak under him. "All right, team," he said, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the chaos. "New mission. New ship. New problems we haven't even invented yet." Grant grinned. "Business as usual, then?" "Exactly," Ethan said. The bridge lights flickered, then steadied. Somewhere deep in the belly of the ship, the primary engines gave a final protesting groan, and then roared to life. Titan's wrath shuddered forward, pushing against the emptiness of space like an old warrior remembering how to fight. Ethan watched the stars tilt slightly through the viewport, the ship's nose rising toward the unexplored sectors beyond. "First stop?" Ramos asked, wiping grease off his hands. Ethan smirked, raising his mug of barely drinkable coffee in a mock salute. "Anywhere that looks at us funny," he said. "And if the locals start shooting, well, at least we're already warmed up." Laughter rolled across the bridge, tired, raw, but real. They had survived hell. They had taken a legend and made it theirs. And now, the galaxy was wide open. Trouble was out there waiting. And somehow Ethan figured it was already afraid. After all, nothing was more terrifying than a bunch of humans with a broken ship, bad coffee, and absolutely no sense of self-preservation. Titan's wrath powered up fully now, its ancient bones creaking but holding strong, engines burning a trail of blue fire into the darkness. The stars beckoned. And humanity, as always, answered. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to this channel, and let's keep exploring the galaxy together.